And if I told you that in Hungary 2025 Hamilton's car was deliberately altered to take performance by his own team? What you are going to listen is not a rumor. It is the confession of its own engineer, and the telemetric data prove it. From days before the Grand Prix, the technical meetings in Maranello had been marked by an intense exchange of ideas about the direction of the setup. Hamilton had directly insisted on the need to provide SF-25 with a more stable rear, something that would allow him to stop later and with more aggressiveness, trusting that the rear train would not play a bad pass in full curve. That stability was crucial in sectors such as the second of the Hungaroring, where the car must chain fast and medium curves without margin for sudden corrections. Charles Leclerc, on the other hand, defended a completely opposite approach. Monegasco was looking for a configuration that maximized rotation at the entrance of the curves, sacrificing part of that rear stability to gain agility in the most closed turns. It was not a minor difference. There were two opposite driving philosophies that demanded very different adjustments in the suspension, differential, and heights of the car. Under normal conditions, a team with two elite pilots choose to develop parallel configurations that conform to individual preferences, without interfering with the other. The atmosphere in the garage, however, was about to be that of a aligned team. The technical conversations seemed to be divided into two well-defined blocks. One focused on supporting the direction requested by Leclerc, and another trying to give Hamilton the tools he requested. Although publicly Ferrari insisted on equal treatment, in private, signs began to circulate that certain decisions were being made with a political weight rather than purely sports. The Hungary GP, which should be the point of union, was silently becoming a test scenario to measure how far the influence of each side came within the power structure of Maranello. During the night from Friday to Saturday, while the paddock slept and the atmosphere in Hungaroring seemed calm, within the Ferrari box a silent maneuver was executed that, the next morning, would completely change the way in which Lewis Hamilton could drive his car. According to the telemetric data analyzed later, the configuration that the British had validated at the end of Friday's training was significantly modified without his knowledge or that of his trusted engineer, Riccardo Adami. Among the most critical changes was the alteration of the rear rolling height, a parameter that, although it may seem lower, radically transforms the behavior of the car in braking and in traction. Hamilton had explicitly requested a more settled rear to be able to hurry the entrance to curve without the rear train being out of it. That height, millimetrically adjusted during Friday, was high, displacing the balance of the car to a more nervous and less predictable behavior when braking strong. To this was added the modification of the preload of the differential, which went to a less progressive adjustment, something that breaks softness in the torque transfer to the rear wheels and causes small adhesion losses just when the pilot begins to release the brake and turn the steering wheel. The most striking contrast was that Charles Leclerc's car did not suffer any unexpected alteration. He retained exactly the changes he had requested: greater rotation at the curve entrance and a smaller rear train, according to his pilot style. The internal records showed that the orders to reverse the Hamilton configuration did not come from their immediate circle, but from the main performance group, a hierarchical instance located above the track engineers, and that it reports directly to the technical and sports direction of the equipment. This type of intervention in a high-level Formula One equipment is extremely unusual without a reason justified by data or security. What happened in this case did not respond to any fault, unforeseen climatic condition, or technical finding that forced the plan to change. Therefore, within the closest environment to Hamilton, the conclusion was clear. The decision had an internal strategic motivation, designed to favor a team approach that did not include both pilots competing on equal terms that weekend. The feeling of betrayal multiplied when Hamilton, when reviewing the FP3 data on Saturday morning, found obvious discrepancies between what he had worked and what he really had under his hands. The car felt nervous in braking, less stable in transitions, and, above all, unpredictable in areas where trust is fundamental. In a circuit as demanding as Hungaroring, where precision decides vital tenths, any mismatch in this type of parameters means losing performance in an irrefutable way throughout the classification. What for the majority was simply a lack of speed in the Hamilton car, for those who were inside the wall was the confirmation that a technical alteration had been executed that, far from being a mistake, seemed part of a calculated plan. On Sunday morning in Hungary, a few hours before the traffic lights, the atmosphere in the Ferrari briefing room was dense. There were no open shouts or discussions, but a latent tension was perceived, as if everyone knew that something important was going to happen. The engineers reviewed procedures, exit strategies, and possible scenarios according to the tire wear. The pilots listened, nodded, and took mental notes, following the usual protocol, until Lewis Hamilton broke the script. At a time when a tactical question about the weather or a technical doubt about brake pressure was expected, Hamilton looked up and, with a firm and leisurely voice, launched a phrase that cut the air in the room. "Do you want 2 cars, or just one?" Riccardo Adami, his career engineer, was the only one who reacted without words. He tried to justify anything or intervene to calm the moment. He just looked at him, nod once and spend the page of his strategic briefing. That gesture, apparently simple, transmitted more than any explanation. There was no possible discussion, and Hamilton should understand that what was happening was beyond the work they could do in their small technical circle. For those who were in that room, it was evident that Hamilton's question was not looking for a verbal answer. When the race began in Hungary, the consequences of the technical alterations suffered by Hamilton's car soon became evident. From the first laps, the British was forced to adapt his pilot to a car that did not respond as he expected. The rear stability that he had sought throughout the weekend had disappeared, and instead he found a car that moved more than in braking and demanded constant corrections when he released the pedal and turned the steering wheel. In a circuit such as Hungary, where each curve changed the following and there is no time to correct errors without losing pace, this type of behavior penalizes more than any other place in the calendar. The posterior telemetry revealed a worrying pattern. The construction of pressure in the brake system was not uniform, causing small variations that forced Hamilton to modulate each entry to curve. This, added to the new differential configuration, reduced its confidence to attack the braking points with the aggressiveness that normally characterizes it. In terms of pure rhythm, these limitations were translated into tenths lost by return that, accumulated throughout the race, made the difference between fighting for a podium and being trapped in the high middle zone. Hamilton was found during much of the test rolling in dirty air, behind cars that, under normal conditions, would have overcome with relative ease. But in this version of the SF-25, any advancement attempt required a confidence margin that simply did not exist. The wear of tires, another of its strengths historically, was also compromised. The lack of stability caused the rear train to work irregularly, increasing temperatures and reducing the useful life of soft and medium compounds. This forced Ferrari to adjust the strategy on the march, trying to minimize the damage with earlier stops. But each tactical change seemed only to contain the problem, never solve it. Meanwhile, Leclerc, with a car that maintained intact the configuration he had requested, could squeeze his pilot style without the limitations facing his partner. The performance difference, although not abysmal in the times by return, was clear enough to leave Hamilton in a defensive position during most of the Grand Prize. The final result was more than a simple bad statistical performance. It was a track demonstration of how a series of seemingly small changes can destroy the confidence of a pilot and completely condition their ability to compete at the highest level. And the most frustrating for Hamilton was to know that this had not been a problem of adaptation or its own errors, but the direct consequence of decisions taken outside their control. Hungary 2025 GP left Ferrari with more than a bad result in the timetable. What happened that weekend showed that the team is not only fighting a battle against McLaren, Red Bull or Mercedes, but is also fighting with himself. The revelation of Riccardo Adami and the way in which the configuration of the Hamilton car was altered without their knowledge point to a structural problem that goes beyond mere competitiveness on the track. The existence of internal factions with different agendas and, in some cases, opposite. For Hamilton, this episode represents a turning point. It is not just about recovering from a bad weekend, but about redefining your relationship with the team and deciding to what extent you are willing to tolerate an environment where your voice, no matter how experienced and backed by titles that you are, can be ignored or even neutralized. His arrival to Ferrari was surrounded by the promise of a new glorious stage, of the possibility of closing his career with a championship dressed in red. However, the reality that Hungary showed is that to achieve this, he will not only have to beat rivals with equal or faster cars, but also to the political and cultural inertia of a structure that has historically had difficulty managing two high-level pilots in equal conditions. For Ferrari, the challenge is even greater. It is not enough to have a competitive car or have two of the most talented pilots on the grill. The key is to rebuild internal trust, eliminate decisions that are born more than personal conveniences than objective data, and demonstrate, both inside and outside the garage, that absolute priority is to win championships, not protect fragile balances.